Hey guys, welcome to Max Tech. I've been using and testing the iPhone 13 Pro Max for just about 2 weeks now, and although this is by far the most happy I've ever been with an iPhone, due to it just being so polished, there are still some software and hardware problems that I'm going to be discussing in this video, as well as the solutions to some of those problems, so let's get right into it. The first problem has to do with overheating issues, which can cause the display to dim down, which are the same issues we had before with the iPhone 12 Pro Max. For example, Max, the other main host of this channel, was doing some real estate drone videography yesterday with his iPhone 13 Pro as the display for his Mavic Air 2 drone, and he found that after only a few minutes out in the sun, the display dimmed down to 50% of the maximum brightness, making it difficult to see the display and it wouldn't even recover. Now this issue is likely due to being out in direct sunlight while requiring high brightness to see the display and actively using GPS to track and control the drone. Now I do want to mention that the dimming issues aren't nearly as bad as last year's 12 Pro Max, which dimmed down to an extremely low level, probably twice as dim as the 13 Pro Max, but it still sucks to see that we have to deal with dimming like this. Now I also want to mention that this doesn't just apply to drone videography, because Tyler Stallman, a photographer who runs a YouTube channel, also noticed that the 13 still dims while taking photos out in the sun, but thankfully not as bad as the 12. But with that said, we actually did find a fix for the display dimming problem, and that is low power mode, which clocks down the speed of the A15 Bionic chip so it uses less power and produces less heat. So Max tested his drone out one more time, except now with low power mode turned on and the brightness manually turned down to 80%, and after 15 to 20 minutes of using his drone outside, he didn't experience any dimming at all and was able to use his drone without any issues, even without having to go into the shade. And to turn this mode on, just go into your settings app, go to the control center, then tap the plus icon next to low power mode, then bring down your control panel by pulling down from the battery icon, and then simply tap on the low power mode icon to turn it on. Now getting into the second problem with the 13 Pro Max, this one has to do with the software. Ever since I got this phone, I've noticed an issue where sometimes my touch inputs don't seem to register, causing me to have to tap multiple times to get into a link. And for some reason, I'm mostly experiencing this issue within the YouTube app when I try to tap on videos and they simply won't load until I move the display around and come back to the video. Now I do want to mention that I experienced this issue with my 12 Pro Max while running iOS 15 beta software, so I'm convinced that it's an issue to do with iOS 15. But even after updating to the latest iOS 15.0.1 update, I'm still getting this touch input reliability issue. So here's a quick tip on how to deal with this until Apple gives it a proper update. Just scroll down slightly and tap in a different location, which works for me sometimes. Now getting into problem number 3, this actually has to do with the cameras on the 13 Pro and the Pro Max. The new macro mode is definitely an awesome addition because it allows you to take photos that were never possible before on an iPhone, allowing you to get much closer than you can on iPhones without this new feature. But there's actually a pretty bad problem with the macro mode. Specifically, when you start getting closer to an object, the system automatically switches to the macro lens for you without letting you manually choose the lens yourself. But the even bigger issue is that it switches to that macro lens way too soon because it tries to keep the transition looking smooth. So it actually uses a digital crop on the ultra-wide lens so it matches the composition. But then if you tap the 0.5x button, it reveals just how much digital crop it was adding to make it look like a smooth transition. But that digital crop is ruining the image quality for those who didn't really want to get super close to the subject and just snap the photo at a medium distance. So if Apple allowed you to switch the cameras manually, perhaps to the telephoto lens, the photo would end up turning out much nicer at that medium distance. But thankfully, there is a way to solve this issue until Apple releases an update. You actually have to physically cover the ultra-wide lens with your finger, allowing you to choose the other lenses to take a shot, like the telephoto, which gives you more background compression. Getting into problem number 4, the camera system on the 13 Pro sometimes chooses to use the telephoto lens for low light shots when it really shouldn't be. During our unbiased camera comparison between the 13 Pro Max and the S21 Ultra, we took a photo in very low light, and the iPhone did much worse than the Samsung. That's because the iPhone chose to use its 3x telephoto lens to take the shot, while the S21 Ultra actually cropped in 3 times on the main camera, which obviously looks much better. Now the reason for that is because the main lens has a much faster aperture, which lets in much more light. So cropping in 3 times on the main lens actually looks better. And the worst part is that on the latest iPhone 13 Pro and Pro Max, the 3x telephoto lens now has an even slower f2.8 aperture than the telephoto lenses on the 11 and 12 Pro Max, which can actually cause nighttime photos to look less detailed because it's taking in less light. So it seems as though the software thinks that using the 3x lens in those dark scenarios will give you more detail, but it doesn't. So users who don't know what's going on are gonna end up with noticeably worse photos compared to someone who does understand all of this and will know that they've gotta switch to the main lens to get the best quality, especially since the main lens supports night mode portraits, combining both of those features. And speaking of night mode, the 13 Pro is the first iPhone which supports night mode directly on the telephoto lens. But the major issue is that because of the slower f2.8 aperture, the photos can actually turn out worse than the 11 and 12 Pro Max, which use a crop of the main lens. And that is because the slower aperture means that you have to wait longer for the sensor to gather light. And the longer you have to wait, the more camera shake gets added to the image, as well as the movements in the subject itself, like these swaying trees that end up looking a bit blurry. So if you're gonna be shooting night mode photos with the telephoto lens, I actually recommend zooming out a slight bit from 3x to 2.9x zoom, forcing it to use the main lens instead, which actually ends up looking better than the telephoto lens. Now the 5th problem has to do with gaming, especially for games that are more graphically intensive. I've been testing out multiple games like Call of Duty Mobile, Pokemon Unite, League of Legends Wild Rift, PUBG, and Genshin Impact, and most of these games run fine without any display dimming and overheating issues, but I started to notice some dimming in PUBG, and then a bunch of dimming in Genshin Impact, since it's the most graphically demanding iOS game out there. Specifically, it would dim down to just over 50% brightness after only 5 to 10 minutes of gameplay at maxed out settings. Now these results are definitely improved compared to the 12 Pro Max, which would dim much more and after a shorter period of time, but still, it sucks to see that Apple just can't keep the A15 chip cool enough to avoid these display dimming issues. However, we discovered a fix. Using low power mode is actually a viable option for gaming, so I ended up making a full video testing an hour of gaming both with and without low power mode being enabled, and I discovered that you'll save a ton of battery life without sacrificing performance, since it's stuck to 60 FPS for the 4 games that we tested. And then in Genshin Impact, low power mode allowed the iPhone to last a full 20 minutes before dimming to the 50% brightness level, compared to only 5 to 10 minutes without low power mode enabled. Now the only issue with this mode is that it actually limits the display refresh rate from 120Hz down to a maximum of 60, so you essentially wouldn't be able to use it if you wanted to play games at 120 FPS. For example, I played Pascal's Wager at 120 FPS and the phone dimmed like crazy after only a few minutes because of the massive graphics load of trying to draw so many frames. So Apple definitely needs to add better cooling to the A16 chip next year to solve this problem. But for 60 FPS games, low power mode is a must. And if you're experiencing display dimming issues, you can try to start your gameplay session off at 80% or lower brightness to reduce heat, and you can also try turning down some of the graphics settings in your game as well. Problem number 6 brings us back to the cameras, specifically the cinematic video recording mode. First off, just the fact that it's limited to 1080p instead of 4K means that I'm basically not gonna want to be recording in this mode because I'd rather have the much better 4K footage. And since the blur edging is still a bit rough around the edges, you kind of have to turn down the blur amount to make it look more natural. But then the other problem is that this mode is locked into 30 FPS recording, which honestly is a bit weird since many cinematographers use 24 FPS video recording, including most movies. In fact, almost every single video we shoot on this channel is shot at 24 FPS, with the only exception being our 60 FPS gaming comparison videos, which are shot that way to show differences in frame rates while gaming. So Apple really should have given us a toggle to at least switch between 24 and 30 FPS for those who want it, but unfortunately they didn't. Getting into problem number 7, Apple did reveal the ProRes video recording feature, which ups the bitrate to give cleaner looking video footage, but there are some big problems with it. First off, since the file sizes are so large, specifically 6 GB per minute for 4K recording, you need at least a 256 GB model to be able to record at 4K. But making it worse, the iPhone still packs a Lightning port, which is extremely slow at transferring data since it uses the old USB 2.0 standard. Now, Michael Tobin, who got an exclusive first look at the iPhone 13 Pro's ProRes video recording feature, said it took him an hour and a half to transfer almost 200 GB of ProRes clips using the Lightning port, which is extremely slow for only around 33 minutes of footage, much slower than USB Type-C speeds. Now, Michael does recommend using the image capture app on a Mac to transfer the clips because it transfers one clip at a time, so if anything fails or you need to unplug it, it's not going to ruin the entire transfer like it will on the Photos app. Now, finishing off with problem number 8, the iPhone 13 Pro Max is missing a very important feature that Android phones have had for years, ever since they switched to OLED displays. Yes, that's the rumored always-on display feature that people thought Apple would be adding ever since the first OLED iPhone 10, but no. And now, with Apple finally giving the iPhone 13 Pro an LTPO display capable of refreshing from 10 Hz all the way up to 120 Hz, people thought that we're finally getting this feature on this iPhone because it's the perfect time to add it, but for some reason, Apple didn't. And to make things even worse, there are no excuses left because the display is now 25% more efficient than the one on the 12 Pro. And on top of that, the battery life in these new iPhones is insane. But Apple simply chose not to add always on for some reason. So my only guess is that Apple intentionally left this feature out to make the next iPhone seem better, or maybe they just didn't think it was polished enough to add it with this phone. So there you guys go. Those are the top 8 problems that we've had with the iPhone 13 Pro. And if you have any more to add, then go ahead and comment them down below. And if any of those tips helped you out, then click the circle above to subscribe for more videos like this one, and definitely check those 2 videos out right over there. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.